Hello, everyone, and welcome to Banyan Global Learning's AI Policy Panel event. The purpose of this event is to explore and discuss the development and implementation of AI policies in K-12 education. By bringing together district and school representatives from Oregon, Michigan, and Nebraska, we aim to highlight diverse approaches and foster a dialogue on the benefits, ethical considerations, logistical challenges, and practical strategies for integrating AI into classrooms. Our goal is to provide valuable insights and actionable strategies that principals and district leaders can use to enhance AI literacy, equity, and effectiveness in their schools. Through this discussion, we hope to identify both consensus and contrasting viewpoints to better understand the complexities and opportunities presented by AI in education. I brought together a group of people, all of whom are working on this huge and messy problem, and I'd like to introduce them now. First, we have Bruce Alter, a pediatric physical therapist and AT consultant at Tigard-Tualatin School District in Oregon. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks.
We also have Aaron Baughman, Assistant Superintendent of Instruction at Northville Public Schools in Michigan.
Thank you.
Justin Bruno, AI Strategist at Michigan Virtual.
Thanks for having me, Seth.
Thank you for coming. Larry Didway, Superintendent from Clackamas Education Service District.
Glad to be here.
Also here in Oregon. Andrew Easton, Digital Learning Coordinator at the ESU Coordinating Council in Nebraska.
Thanks, Seth. Excited to be here and learn today.
Awesome. Kasey Fernandez, District Library Media Specialist at Tigard-Tualatin School District in Oregon.
Thank you for including me today.
Thanks for being here. And finally, Leanne Schur, Director of Technology and Information Services in North Clackamas School District.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thanks for coming. And that's also in Oregon. I wanted to open today with a couple of quotes. You guys probably know Ethan Mollick. I'm holding up his book called Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. And I pulled a couple of quotes here just to kind of get our minds primed for the type of thing that we're going to be talking about today. Here's one of them. AI in education isn't just about delivering content. It's about understanding how students learn and adapting in real time to their needs. This level of personalization can revolutionize learning outcomes. AI can help bridge educational gaps by providing high-quality learning resources to underserved communities. It has the potential to democratize education on a global scale. As we integrate AI into education and policy, we must remember that the goal is to enhance human capabilities, not to replace human judgment. The most effective solutions will always involve human-AI collaboration. And the ethical implications of AI in education and policy are profound. We must ensure that these systems are transparent, fair, and aligned with our societal values. So today what we're going to do is we're going to use the Oregon Department of Education's guidelines for AI. And specifically, they have a document that is called their Policy and Protocol Development Planning and Reflection Tool. We're going to go step by step through that policy and tool. And we are going to ask targeted questions of specific people here in the group. And then we're going to follow up with a bit of a discussion before moving on to the next portion. The first part of this discussion is going to talk about reviewing the equity decision tree and specific equity-focused AI questions. That's the first part of Oregon's AI Policy and Protocol Development Planning and Reflection Tool. And I'm highlighting just one of the best practices that they use there. It says, organize a team to lead in the development of AI policy with a variety of roles, perspectives, and experiences, including librarians, library staff, media specialists, and IT staff. Depending on the size of the school or district, consider partnering with other schools or districts across the state in order to engage collaboratively in this process. The question that I have about equity is going to be for Bruce Alter and Kasey Fernandez. What are the equity implications of AI being used in schools? And how are these equity implications being addressed through policy, particularly for historically and systemically marginalized student groups? Bruce, we'll start with you.
Actually, I'm going to have Kasey start, but I'll chime in.
Sounds good.
Go for it, Kasey.
Okay. For us, our district working together, the most important thing has been ensuring that we can provide scaffolds that we can ensure equitable and access and use, because we know that whether or not we allow students access to the resource, they are using it and they have been using it. There's a lot of research through Pew Research and many other polling systems that just show that it's exponentially being used for middle and high schoolers across the United States. So our focus was to really create a team, starting with those passionate, which was Bruce and myself and our director of technology, and then use that to create policies. And we do have quite a few policies that we are able to share in scaffolds. So the scaffolds are what we have to guide responsible use and media literacy. So ensuring that our students are able to see when they should and should not use AI, it was very important to us. So we developed a AI use stoplight inspired by some of the many resources that are out in the world on the web, and through our committee, our very diverse committee, and what we know our students need. And we also have a guidance for how to navigate suspected unauthorized use to ensure that our students are not being reprimanded unnecessarily. That was a big concern of our students, but we also needed to do it in a way that supports our staff members as well. So I will share a link to our guide. It's just bit.ly/TTSDAI. And you can see how we addressed many of these issues that the ODE's checklist goes through. And as we were developing our policies, we did actually use the checklist, which we found to be very great source of information. And Bruce has an additional resource that he is creating for other districts outside of TTSD to follow our footsteps, and also has a field work case studies that he's used, how he's helped students benefit from using AI in the classroom.
And so what I'll add is I've had an opportunity to speak nationally, and I was part of a panel with the Secretary of Education, Miguel Cardona, and to my surprise, and I guess I'm not surprised anymore, but students with disabilities have been completely left out of the conversation. And yet when I saw ChatGPT for the first time, that was, maybe it's because I work in special ed, maybe it's because I have some disabilities myself, but I saw that as the greatest promise. So one of the populations that we're making sure are included for equitable use are students with disabilities. And I do think, and now that I have some students that I've actually worked with, so it's not theoretical anymore, that we're going to see the greatest potential for improvement in academic performance among our students with disabilities, especially those with physical disabilities, and the possibility of curriculum being available for our students with intellectual disabilities through AI used for text leveling. So it's a pretty remarkable, and yet if you look at the guidance across the country, you rarely see a mention of students with disabilities. And when you talk to people, typically they focus on cheating and other things that I think are more non-issues. So that's the perspective that we're trying to bring. So in the policy, what we're looking for is there may be restrictions on some student use of AI, but there will also be documentation in IEPs for when students with disabilities are allowed to use it, and that may be used more liberally than the students without. Thanks.
And so, Bruce, is it a matter of like carving out specific policy for students with disabilities? Like how granular do you have to get in order to make sure that this is being used in a way that's fair and equitable?
So cut me off at any time. What I've found is the only way that students with disabilities are going to have access to these tools is to ensure that districts have policies that allow students in general education to use it, and the teachers have professional development. I can't just, so in a way, I guess I'm being subversive. My way to get to the end result, which is kids with disabilities having access to these tools, is to ensure that districts have thought through the issues for gen ed. With that said, there are going to be times where, what you need to look for when you're having students use Gen AI, are they using it to enhance a skill, or is it a replacement? And of course, a calculator is a great example, because most of us probably can't do long division anymore unless we have some math teachers on this call. So in many ways, a calculator has been a replacement, but we figure that's okay because all of us have calculators with us now. For students with disabilities, there are many skills that they have zero access to right now. Creation of art, music, especially against students with physical disabilities. Being able to put together meaningful writing for our students who use augmentative communication units. And so what we're looking for is carving out that when there may be restrictions in gen ed, there will be, if it's documented on an IEP, which is probably the cleanest way to do it. That's how we do everything else, right? If you need a testing accommodation and you're in SPED, it's got to be documented on the IEP. So that's what we're looking for. And we want to ensure that the policy allows that type of carve out. I'm going to add one more thing. I was able to present at a conference, and they used so many initials, I'm not even sure what it stood for, but it was in Seattle, and part of it was testing accommodations, and part of it were national superintendents. I'm not kidding. I mean, they have a lot of initials. ACES was one of the group, ASES. And what I raised for them is that when we have students that are starting to show success using generative AI academically, how will the standardized tests allow that use? I mean, it took most of the testing accommodations, it took them 15 years to get word prediction in. And they're just barely getting dictation in. How long is it going to take when we have a student who's doing long form writing with generative AI or other to include? So the reason why I presented at that conference was to get them thinking about it.
Excellent. Are there any questions or comments from the panel? And the topic here is equity implications of AI being used in schools. We can either dive into Bruce's work or we can bring our own perspective.
I guess I'll just add my background before technology was in working with English learners, and our multilingual learners, similar to what Bruce was talking about, really can benefit from the use of chat tools and generative AI. I also have been thinking a lot recently. I've had the opportunity to work with some teachers in different places, and thinking about how we can utilize that as professionals to scaffold for our students. And Bruce has sort of alluded to the idea of text leveling, but I also think it gets at vocabulary development and some of the scaffolds that we implement in the classroom with visuals, for example. It might take a teacher, hours to find just the right visual that's really going to encapsulate the ideas that they're trying to get across. Versus if you have a image generator, you can put that information in and get exactly what you're looking for. And so I think there's real benefits to teachers as well in their ability to scaffold experiences for their students.
And so in terms of policy, Leanne, is it a matter of like what Bruce was saying, trying to get AI adopted for gen ed as a way to make it available to ELLs? Do you think that there are special considerations that need to be made for students with that distinction?
I think to Bruce's point about having it in place for gen ed, and then makes it implicitly available for our other populations, our marginalized populations. But I also think I have some cautions with the use of AI as well with our multilingual learners, that particularly in the area of text translation, and that we don't over rely on that, so that we're still challenging our students and developing their academic English proficiency. So I think it's that idea of PD. How do we use it appropriately so that we're benefiting our students, we're supporting them in appropriate ways, but we're also giving them the challenge that they really need in order to develop their skills.
Makes sense. I want to move on to engaging the district and school community. The best practices that are highlighted in the Oregon document are to provide teaching and learning sessions to community members and the use of AI programs in schools, including both opportunities and concerns and risks. It also says to consult with community partners, including teachers, parents, and students, and the tribes, to ensure that policy decisions are informed by a diverse range of perspectives. And I think one of those perspectives could be around like general media literacy. And this is a question for Larry Didway. How might AI spark dialogue around broader media, digital, algorithmic literacies that will continue to impact students' lives?
Yeah. It might be better to say, how might it not? Because I think it really provokes lots and lots and lots of questions. But I can think of a handful of really urgent conversations that communities need to have related to AI coming into classrooms. And one of those would just be how we integrate what we're doing with AI education with our existing curricula. And we really need to integrate it with the broader media and digital literacy curricula. We need to make sure that we are helping students understand AI's role in just everyday technology and how that can deepen students' comprehension of those algorithmic biases and digital ethics. So I think that's one bucket of thought and conversation that I think we need to have. Another is just about critical thinking and digital citizenship, and thinking about how we can use AI as a tool that will really foster critical thinking by examining how are those algorithms influencing the media that we consume? How is it influencing the social media that we're a part of? How is it influencing our information access? And really encouraging that our teachers are critically helping students critically assess AI generated content and its impact on their perceptions and their decisions. Another area I think about is just the real world application and relevance, and being able to show students how AI really affects various aspects of our life, from social media algorithms to those personalized learning tools, which we were just talking about how impactful those can be. We also, I think, want to be advocating for project-based learning that incorporates AI to solve real-world problems and really enhance engagement and practical understanding in that way too. I just heard recently a presentation from a group in Ohio, and they are working hard to create basically a statewide, I'm going to call it a science fair, that allows and invites students to meet a challenge using AI and then present that in a way that is addressing real world and relevant problems in kids' lives. So I think that's another really promising and exciting area. We've already talked a little bit about equity and access, but I think that is definitely something that has to be a part of a community conversation. We know for sure that AI, just like every other innovation, is either going to bridge or widen our digital divide. And unfortunately, the track record is it usually widens it. So what can we do to make that, to mitigate that? I think we want to have discussions about making sure that there's equitable access to AI education and resources made available to every student, and particularly those from marginalized communities. And I know that there are some promising efforts in the nation that are demonstrating that now. And the last thing I think about is just how this is a really great opportunity to collaborate with our industry partners and higher education, and that we can develop partnerships with tech companies and other businesses and universities, and really keep that K-12 curricula updated with the latest advancements, the latest ethical considerations, and really be able to focus and provide professional development for educators that is informed and current with AI trends and tools.
We saw an example of that collaboration earlier this spring, where I saw you at the University of Portland at a conference that you put on with the university partner. And I think that, in talking about equity, one of the best arguments, I think, for presenting AI to students directly is the argument that, assuming it's a positive thing and a tool that can be used, for some students, school is going to be the only place that they see it. And so you are going to have a widening gap if we don't put this in front of students. The urgency with which to do that, I think that's still a topic of debate. Following up on what Larry said, do we have any input from the panel on engaging district and school community? Kasey.
I'd like to share that since we do have our guide now, when we have our policies in place, our next step is the rollout. So this is going to be where our heavy lifting occurs. We had our passionate community members help us before, but now we have to figure out how we're going to gather awareness and compliance. So we do have biannual in our policy administrative rules. We require biannual training for students and staff with technology, responsible technology use, including AI literacy. So that's our start. We do have a plan, but it is really important to have some sort of requirement for training for both students and staff after you have the policy in place. So that's wish us luck as we undergo that next year. We think we have a solid plan, but as we know, it will take a lot of networking.
And it's tricky to, with the, 150 things that are on the list of things that you'd love to talk to your parents about. How do you get everyone aligned on this particular issue? I think we have the benefit right now of it still very much being in the zeitgeist. And so people may be motivated to come together. And then once you have them together, maybe we can talk about other things too. And once we have like a consensus, a guiding light moving forward, it comes down to actually looking at some of these tools that we might put in front of parents and teachers. And this is the third thing in the Oregon toolkit to review products and services. The highlighted best practice that I'd like to bring in is to conduct a thorough review of any AI products or services before introducing them to the classroom, paying particular attention to their potential impact on equity and student data privacy, and consider developing your own tool for evaluation. The person I'd like to call on here is Aaron Baughman from Michigan, who has done an extensive amount of review of products and services. I also have to give a special thank you to him for joining us via a cruise. I think he's off the coast of Cuba right now, but the Wi-Fi is still good. Aaron, how strong are the processes or systems for monitoring student use of AI for barriers, bias, or other undesirable consequences of AI use by learners? And how are these emergent issues addressed? So like once you find that they're starting to happen, how do you address such a thing?
So we started really just looking at every product that popped up. And we started to ask ourselves the question, what unique thing does this tool do that we want to pursue? And then I had a very small group of teachers, one of them being my wife, who teaches in a neighboring district, and then some of my own teachers. And I would have them sit with me. We would develop a lesson or a piece of a lesson using one of the AI tools. Then we would put it in front of kids in a contained environment with parent notification, and we would try it out. And honestly, even before that, we like to say that we middle schooled these things to death. We ask every really ridiculous question. We ask about, tell me where to bury a dead body, how to get away with murder, how do I make napalm, like everything we could think of, to try to see how it would respond. And the tools that we went forward with consistently said, thanks for taking the time to write that, but I'm not engaging in that conversation, and then redirected them. And then we also checked it for responses that came back. And there were times when the response wasn't what we wanted. Sometimes that was a prompting issue, and sometimes it was a AI issue. And so we've been working closely with these product manufacturers or developers, and they've been very responsive for the most part. They're thirsting for that feedback because they don't have practical application of their own that they can do with students. And so we've put it out there with kids. We've pushed on these materials. And in the end, we found around 9 products that each have something that the other doesn't. And we started really engaging teachers with those. And then we put them into the classroom. We started using in real lessons, again, with parent notification. And we started building and designing real lessons, sometimes a supplement to a lesson, sometimes an entire remodeling of a lesson, and then had teachers give it some time, try it, and then we asked them to think about what they could do next. And really we started pushing, and then those tools started to kind of, become a hierarchy of like which ones were being used most often. And even within like a magic school where you've got 75 different tools, ultimately what we share with them is that every tool is just another way to use a bot to do this generative AI thing. And so it's all about the prompting. Now, with the pushback, I will tell you that there are a couple of companies where we've put in things like, did Abraham Lincoln own slaves? And one of them will come back and say yes, and one of them will come back and say no. And what we've decided is that if that message continues, you can use it as a learning opportunity as a teacher, certainly. And you can even use it as an opportunity to say, okay, well, here's where the digital citizenship comes in. Which of these is right and which is wrong? You have to figure that out. And ultimately making sure that you share with them the proper answer. But then we share that with the developers. We talk to them about ways in which to fix that. Now, a lot of them are working behind the scenes with some very expensive tools to scrub information that goes out and scrub information that comes in. We have really vetted all these privacy policies with a whole list of attorneys, looking at ways to make sure that our students' information is contained. Even our GPT, our LLM, we really use Microsoft Copilot right now because we're Microsoft Enterprise clients, so our information is protected. We're trying to keep kids away from things like ChatGPT, warning them that that information is not reliable or safe. It's not protected in any way. They're not protected in any way. We try to help them stay within the tools that we provided, that we vetted, that we know are going to be most secure. Certainly nothing is 100%. And our teachers are really mindful of that. The good news is in all of these programs that we're using, teachers always maintain the ability to see everything. There is nothing happening if you're using these types of programs where the teacher can't see the exact chat log. They can see everything. They can hear and watch and monitor in real time or afterwards every single thing that was said back and forth. And most of these programs have built in tools that say, hey, you want to check on this kid, some sort of signal, some sort of report, some sort of flag that says this kid's having struggles, or there's something being said here, or there's kid is off task. And so the teacher in live time can be in the classroom with their computer up and see in real time. I don't know that any of the programs we're using or any of the mainstream programs that don't have something like this. And those tools are getting better and better every day. Even just since June, watching what these companies have done over the last month has been staggering to watch. It's like somebody told me like 2 years in AI is like a year in real time. It's just crazy how much they're taking that feedback and building it into their systems.
And so in this review process, are you like keeping up with those improvements? Are you like, because I mean, not only you're reviewing new stuff that's coming in, new tools that you're learning about, but you're also keeping up with the improvements, or is it a matter of like then disseminating that responsibility to the teachers and having them report back to you? Like, how do you handle that?
So right now I'm still maintaining control of new tools. So like we just started investigating into Brisk Boost, which is Brisk for Teachers student version, and Snorkel, which is a product that's been out but we haven't used yet. I'm maintaining control of the first level of vetting before that ever gets into the hands of a teacher to even test. Then it goes to the teachers that I trust who've been part of this conversation, who are kind of my front line. I let them play with it, experiment with it, try something different. We just, again, we like with Snorkel, we just show them like, let's just do a prompt like how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Like we just try something. We look at what it can do. We look at the responses, what the kids would be getting if they were on it. And then we put it in front of kids and we let kids try it. And so each time we're looking and pushing for those things. So yeah, we're monitoring it. I'm still maintaining because our policy says the assistant superintendent of instruction will be responsible for it, right? So it's not going into their hands. Now I can't tell you there aren't teachers using rogue programs, but they're certainly not endorsed. And I did something this past year that I've never done before. I went to the Board of Ed and I said, hey, these programs are too young for me to say this is the one or these are the ones. I need your permission to continue using all of these. All 9 of these have something that the others do not that make them viable. And we want to watch them develop over time. So I need you to give me the time to adopt all of them. So we're paying for premium versions of all of these tools. And we're taking the time to decide because they're just all in their infancy. And you can't judge them by what they were 3 months ago. You have to judge them by where they're going and who gets there, even though like Power Buddy, we just started using for Schoology and it's really in its infancy. But when you look at the roadmap, it's like, man, this is going to be amazing if they get this done. That's a big question, right? So we have to stay with them to see if that happens. And if it doesn't, then we know it's time to cut and run.
And so through all of this, you're learning so much about each of these tools. You're learning about how they get done in the classroom. You're learning about what teachers use them for, where the potential dangers and pitfalls are. And then eventually it's time to establish or reestablish or reconfirm some clear guidelines and develop policy. That's what the fourth section of the Oregon tool is about. The highlighted best practices here are to establish clear guidelines around the use of AI technologies, including when and how it should be used and what data will be collected. To consider expanding the current acceptable use policy in order to include policies for both staff use and student use that take into account both opportunities and risks with using AI, and to ensure that the student policy prioritizes student data privacy laws. My question is for Leanne Scher. When creating a policy for a rapidly evolving technology, what balance should we seek between specificity and flexibility?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's one we're still struggling with. We have not actually adopted a policy at this point, and it's specifically because we don't think we're quite ready to be specific enough to have a policy that's going to be flexible enough, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think the point earlier about how quickly this is evolving is a critical consideration. We, at this point, have been able to fall under the umbrella of our existing policies and practices. So we have our acceptable use policy that talks about, responsible digital use for students and staff. It talks about copyright. It talks about being safe online. We have our practices around reviewing new tools that speak to age level and content appropriateness. And so we've been applying those. As a district, we haven't yet adopted a new tool because we haven't yet found one that fits. So we're kind of the opposite, I guess, of Aaron, that we're hitting back until we see one that really meets the needs that as we see of a whole in what we're able to do for our students. But in terms of a policy, at this point, we're still in the realm of giving guidance to teachers on what to look out for, what to be careful about, what to think about and be aware of as they're trying things out with their students. And then we apply our rules in terms of age access. So, for example, our middle and elementary students don't have access to AI tools that they can access through our. They're blocked by our filters, basically. And there's always some that are going to get through. But the websites that are indicated that they're not appropriate for age 13 and under, we don't have our elementary and middle school have access to it. So we're sort of using those existing tools that we have in place to allow us our teachers primarily to get a better understanding of where this is going to fit in to their classroom and what they do with the teaching and learning process. So we're trying to approach it from a teaching and learning process, I guess is what I'm saying, than a policy process. And that takes time because we're still figuring out how do we integrate this with what we're doing. We have some teachers who are particularly interested. This is all being driven at this point by our teachers, of those who are particularly interested or particularly concerned as well about AI and what it's going to mean for the classroom. And we have some teachers who are meeting together on a semi-regular basis to talk about what they're doing, bring up considerations for our leadership, and then to begin crafting guidance for teachers. But we haven't adopted any specific policies because we just don't think we're there yet with how quickly the technology is evolving.
And I think that's such a good example of, okay, we don't have a policy, but we do, it's not like we're not thinking about this, right? Like there's a lot that we're telling our teachers in terms of how we want to be thinking about this, how they can use their experimentation as a way to inform what the policy could be. With Aaron in Michigan, you kind of have, as you said, a bit of an opposite approach where everything runs through the assistant superintendent, right? Like he owns those things and then he's disseminating them down. I wonder from the panel, is there anybody in between? If you're not in like fully open experimentation or have already established some clear guidelines and policy. Like, where are you with policy right now?
I can tell you that there are schools here in Michigan who have looked to their kind of policy boilerplate consultant shops to write boilerplate policy and then adopt them wholesale by their school boards. And I feel like that this topic has been one that has actually raised more concerns than other topics with that type of process, because more people are saying exactly what Leanne just said, is that we don't know enough yet. We're still in a very much an R&D phase to be adopting that kind of boilerplate policy wholesale. So we're seeing even some pushback on that kind of process. The districts that I have seen that have adopted those policies, they have not look to us to come in and do training with their staff or any kinds of like task force facilitation or anything like that. So I think they are kind of hoping that the policy dictates behavior later on. And I'm wondering how that's going to play out over time. But I guess we'll see.
So would you say that that's districts that just sort of want to check a box and not think about it anymore and just kind of hoping it goes well?
I think so, or they're just looking for some sort of outside expertise, right? And expertise that I think is a little bit more turnkey than like maybe some of the expertise on this panel who would say, here are some factors to consider, but not necessarily actions to take.
Yeah, and it's so tricky with a technology like this. We were talking before we started recording about how, this is a tool that does 100,000, I mean, that might be conservative, but 100,000 different things. Like, how do you write a policy that's going to work for all 330 million Americans? Like, it boggles the mind to think about how this is going to go in a way that that can be standardized like that. Of course, there will be some things that emerge, but you got to think that there's some local consideration. Aaron, what do you think?
Seth, I would say a couple of things. One, I've made it clear to our board and they're very comfortable with our procedure and policies are going to change more with this particular policy than anything. We started with a very kind of safe, and then we already modified it. Like, originally there was no student use, and then there was student use, and I think back to our days when the internet first became a part of us. We all had to adopt acceptable use policies, something that was brand new for many of us. And how many times have we updated those acceptable use policies to deal with social media and the onslaught of like news boards and things that we have all been through. The first time MySpace showed up, like, we've been through all of these things. This is no different. You're going to have to adopt a policy that starts with the basic understanding and then be ready to change that thing over and over again as we learn and grow and learn and grow, just like we did with the internet.
I want to add one thing to that, is that what I have found that I do as I review, hey, I'd love to use this new program. So we have an adoption process where people will request to use a particular program. I am much more careful about how I review what is in the how the data is used, how the information is retained, how, if it's an AI piece, how it connects to how our students connect to it and how our data connects to it. And then I try and be really explicit with our instructional leadership in, hey, this is a great tool, and I want you to know these things about it. Here's 3 things you need to consider. Have you considered that student voices, for example, are going to be retained because they're talking to this program? So just be aware that, and that has been helpful, because I think that's where you said, maybe we're like 20 minutes ahead of people on how we're looking at AI.
I said 20 hours, but
20
okay.
hours. Okay. Well, I feel like 20 minutes, but okay, I'll take the 20 hours. But it's things that people haven't had to think about, right? And we can't write a policy that's going to address all of those things. But what we can do is say that we keep students safe. Here's the things that we're aware of. And then as we're reviewing those new tools and new, website access or whatever it is, that we're keeping that big picture of student safety and security and our requirements under SIPA, like, and FERPA, that we're keeping that and we're ensuring that those are met. But we don't have a specific and AI, because it's under that umbrella, right? And that's where I see my role as the technology director, is in that expertise of reviewing those and highlighting. And we may decide, you know what, that's an acceptable risk for us. And we may decide in another case, you know what, that's not an acceptable risk for us at this time. But it's elevating that information and naming it and being really explicit with folks so that they can make an instructional decision as well as a risk decision on an adoption.
Yeah, I think that's a great point of the existing laws that dictate what can be done with student data. That's the tools that we consider to use in our practice are ones that obviously are saying that they're adhering to those laws. I'd like to believe that those companies do not want to get sued, and therefore they are actually adhering to those laws. But obviously, there's this is the Wild West, right? There's going to be some risk that comes along with all of these things, but using the federal laws, I think, is a great guiding light as well. And then eventually, at some point, we have to get to the point where we are going to roll this out and include some professional learning as part of the approach. That's the fifth part of the Oregon plan. Some highlighted best practices here are to consider the various audiences needing training, including IT personnel, classroom teachers, librarians and library staff, media specialists, school staff, families, and students. And to provide training and support for educators, students, and families around the use of AI technologies, including how to use it effectively and responsibly, and how to mitigate any potential negative impacts. The question that I have is for Justin Bruno. I know that you do a lot of this training traveling around your state. I'd love to hear just kind of a snapshot of the mindset of most educators towards AI here in the summer of 2024, which might rapidly change by 3 weeks from now. But then also, how can AI literacy be incorporated as a component of broader literacy and equity training so that it doesn't just become just one more thing or someone else's topic to teach?
Yeah, I think the data here is a little bit hard to wrangle, where there are so many national surveys. It seems like there's a national survey released every other week about how teachers are using AI, how many of them are using AI. And a lot of times the numbers are in competition or they seem contradictory. Some say usage as high as 75% among teachers. Some say as low as 20%. I think it depends on where you are. I think if you are fortunate enough to have leaders like we have on this call who have prioritized this as an issue and helped raise awareness for staff, then I think you're a step ahead. What I would say is I think we ended the last school year doing a pretty good job at chipping away at the problem of contextualizing AI, specifically in an academic integrity and plagiarism context. I think we've done a pretty good job of raising awareness that this is a bigger issue. There are more things to be considered, and it should require more nuanced thinking outside of that space. But I can tell you, my calendar for August and September is loaded up with AI 101 trainings and folks who have never used ChatGPT or any of these tools either. So I still say we're pretty much at maybe a 1.0 or 1.5 stage of this in terms of an AI literacy among our staff being developed. How that relates to policy, I think, is really interesting. I actually got to do a training in Aaron's district back in October, and Aaron was one of the first ones to bring us in. He might have been the first one to bring us in to do a face-to-face training. And I heard after my session a conversation between an administrator and a teacher. And the teacher was advocating really strongly for clear, strict guidance or policy because it was becoming an issue in their ELA classroom. And then the administrator was saying, well, as you just heard from this session that Justin delivered, there's a lot to untangle and think about before we can really come up with a clear, nuanced policy. And so that was the gray space that I think we're still living in, right? We need people to understand and build that literacy in themselves so that they can inform that policy process, right? So they aren't just kind of expected to abide by that policy once it's adopted by a task force or by central administration. So I think it's kind of happening concurrently, right? Just doing those 101 trainings, whatever we can do to build that awareness and giving people kind of enough understanding about the technical processes that these tools use to actually come up with their output is helping them become more informed consumers. And then hopefully what we strive for is to actually be creators with the technology. Where I see, or I hope that goes eventually is, well, let me put it this way. Districts in Michigan, at least, I'm sure this is like this around the country, right? You have kind of district provided PD days where you might bring in an outside facilitator, and there are a certain number of hours that teachers need to be trained by or provided that training for the course of a year. And as districts are filling out their PD calendars, they're thinking like, where can I slot AI in for 4 to 8 hours, right? And then I've kind of hopefully checked the box, built at least enough literacy or awareness. What I hope, and what our hope is that we're brought back in to go deeper and to come and start talking to smaller audiences. So curriculum teams or subject subject teams, right? Core subject area teams, to start thinking about assessment redesign, to start thinking about kind of the acceptable use for students in these areas, and like syllabi redesign, all sorts of things that we'd like to go deeper on. I would tell you there probably aren't many districts in the country, especially in the state, that are there yet. I hope we get to that point eventually. What we try to stress is this notion of developing really good AI literacy in your staff so that they can have good and transparent conversations with students as well, right? Because I think that's the thing that's making everyone feel so uncomfortable, right? Like it's this arrival technology. Students are using it. We don't have a lot of control over that. Staff feel a little bit taken aback because they haven't had enough time to become acquainted with it and understand their own philosophies around it. So how do we kind of build that capacity in them to be able to have those good and transparent conversations with students so that everyone's kind of on equal footing and understands like what we're doing at our district with AI? So we point to a lot of different frameworks, like the Digital Promise AI literacy framework is phenomenal, kind of breaks it down between, use, evaluate, understand. How do I think about this and how it's going to impact everything we do? Like if it's truly a general purpose technology like the internet, it's not just going to be something that is kind of put in a box over here. It's really going to be woven through everything we do. So if a district has PLC structures or other kind of professional learning structures that they actually affect change through, I would hope AI becomes a standing item on those meetings and kind of a standing topic for discussion and even just an area of their own professional expertise that they develop over time once they see the real benefits and what it can do, right? It can help engage students. It can help differentiate for your learners. It can help you be more innovative. It can help them take more ownership of their learning. So once we open that door, I think, I hope for my own job security's sake, we're still having really important conversations around this for the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, seems so. I mean, the point you bring up is such a critical one. It's that, we can do all this training around what is this, how can you use it? But the real question is, how is this going to impact education, and how do we need to change our existing structures in order to accommodate that? And that is the much deeper question that you're getting at, that we're all still answering. But there are some real indications of where this might be going, and some real thoughtful, incredible educators out there who, if given the opportunity and the foundational knowledge to work with this technology, can really start to consider those questions. How do you redo assessments? How do you redo syllabi? I think it's a fascinating topic, and one that we're not going to stop talking about for some time, I think. And then after we do that professional development, after we have established a policy, there's a process of monitoring and determining effectiveness. And seeing if the things that we thought were true are things that are actually true. That's the sixth and final part of the Oregon guidelines. And the highlighted best practices here are to start with one school or grade level band before rolling it out to a whole district, and be prepared to make adjustments if any negative impacts on equity or other concerns arise. My question is for Andrew Easton. Is AI supporting the whole learner, including social dimensions of learning, such as enabling students to be active participants in small group and collaborative learning? For example, does AI contribute to aspects of student collaboration we value, like shared attention, mutual engagement, peer help, self-regulation, and building on each other's contributions?
Simple question, right? I mean, I feel like I can just answer that and solve all of our problems.
Thank you. I thought so. That's why I picked you.
I certainly don't want to take up too much of our remaining time, but I almost want to go back a little bit to Justin's and use that as some context in trying to step to this pretty large question. In that, as he shared, I come from a perspective where I became a much stronger advocate for these conversations when I realized 2 years ago that students were already using this for their classroom work in 2023. And so let's set that first as the landscape, right? So students, whether they're of age to use these tools or not, were using this in the 22-23 school year and have 2 school years under their belt with this without much in the way of support. And that doesn't lead to best practices or leveraging that in the ways that support academics, but rather lead to some of the statistics that we can see coming out from various surveys. And I'm like, Justin, depends on who you're listening to, but that would say that students aren't using this to support their learning, but in place of it. And so obviously then we're reaching out for help, and policy would be a great place to do that. But when you couple the things that we're talking about here with regards to risk, with districts saying, hey, what's our legal baseline that'll keep us from being in trouble? And most of the time that's leave it to the classroom teacher to decide. And when that happens and that person doesn't have the professional development or the confidence that they have to go ahead to lean into those spaces, they don't. And so things don't move forward. And if the tools aren't permissible to use until you're 18, we can't practice. And so you want to usher students into their early exposure to this. So we don't run into some of the shortfalls that we did at the time when the internet came around that we needed digital citizenship for, with that 1.0 version where it was don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, because they had been doing those things so long without conversations. And that it's just kind of we're at a place where our hands are tied, or at least it starts to feel that way, outside of the opportunity for educators to learn a little bit more about this technology. And with that AI literacy piece, so maybe to then come full circle or around to your question, which is going to require a PD, which I do foresee, I would think in this next year, where we're going to see more walled garden type of approaches. I think Aaron maybe alluded to that a little bit with Microsoft Copilot, where you're going to have districts that can ensure that the access to some of these tools is keeping student work and information local. And I think as those start to rise, along with the integration of AI into the tools we're already using. So for example, like this summer, as Canvas announces partnership with Comigo, and we're going to have an AI tutor for anyone who's using that LMS. I think that's, I know they're not quite there yet. They're in the education. They're with the tools that are for educators now, but that's the aspiration where it's going. And so as that creeps along, what do we do in the interim between, right? And I think that comes down to teachers modeling how you could use this, particularly secondary, but I think you could do this at any level, because students might not be able to put their hands on the tool, but you could certainly speak to how you could potentially leverage it in a particular context. I think it would be phenomenal if math teachers and science teachers and English teachers and social studies, everyone found articles of the way in which this technology is influencing these respective disciplines, and hold space, whether it's through Socratics or inquiry, for students to really start to have dialogue around what the ethics are, and let them start to drive some of those, supported by the professional in the room, right? Who's there to help facilitate conversations and offer counter arguments and push students to think about this more intentionally than we've had the space or the opportunity to do up to this point. And I think that to me feels like some of the best work we can do while we wait for some of these other bigger pieces to come along. And they are, right? I don't want to say that those things aren't, but even the most tech adverse teacher can still have the skill set to be able to take an article and sit down with students and hold space for it. And I think our kiddos need that. And as we move further along with those types of understanding of how we can leverage this in productive ways, we get back to Bruce's initial, where we can certainly leverage this for all students. I love like the UDL piece and the opportunities that I think we can bring about for all students with access by having these tools available. But I guess I'll close my little rant here by saying that my daughter's 13, and it's been really fun to support her as someone who can be in her ear about that stuff and help her with things, and then watch her grow and how she thinks to leverage these tools. And it's helped her with everything from study guides where she brought home a question that had to deal with kinetic energy and thermal energy, and she at 13 couldn't figure out the relationship between those from Google searches because the articles were over her head. But she could ask her AI friend on Snapchat how to do that at a 6th grade level with examples, and she taught it to herself in a time and span that was pretty short. And even as recently as 2 days ago, she came up because she was making a birthday card for her friend, and she put a really witty remark on the inside that came from AI. She told me at the end of it. And so just giving students an opportunity to think about the positive uses for this and supporting that, I think, is something worth holding space for while we wait for the tools and the safety and the policy and all the other pieces that have to be there to come along.
It's funny, Andrew, in my notes here, I have as the facilitator to summarize key points and make connections between everything that was said, but you just did that for me. So thank you. You must run a podcast.
I might sometimes, yeah.
I do want to ask the panel, just with the couple minutes we have left here, as a result of listening to these other thinkers today about this particular issue that is, is taking the educational world by storm. What are some things that you're thinking about as a result of this conversation? And what are some things that you noticed and that you heard today that you're going to bring home to your people?
I don't know if there's something specific, but I always appreciate these conversations because it makes me feel less alone and less behind, if that makes sense. That it feels like, kind of this is looking over your shoulder and, there's, people are so far ahead of us and everyone's kind of, on the edge. And it's very reassuring to know that we're all kind of grappling with those same questions, and that we're all trying to figure out how to best proceed, keeping in mind, effective teaching and learning, as well as student safety and security. So I don't know if there's anything specific that I can point to other than it is reassuring. So I appreciate all of you for that.
I just have to say, Erin, I'd love to see your list of the others other than Copilot that you've had success with. And I'm excited to learn more about Power Buddy. We're excited to do some more work with School AI because we do have a data privacy agreement with them now. So I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I will say that School AI, I think, has the most promise for truly impacting the classroom. Oh, look, he's got a School AI shirt. So I do love what Bruce and Kasey both shared though about special ed, and I don't know if it's because I have a child with special needs who's been through the K-12 system, but I have been really inclusive all along, and I kind of every tool I just see as a way for EL and for special ed students and anyone really with special services needed. But I'm not sure that I've been as I guess as vocal as maybe I should, make sure that others think that way too. Just because I'm thinking that way doesn't mean they are. And I want to make sure that they realize that these programs are going to give every kid access to what they need and more.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate bringing it full circle there. Andrew, one more comment?
Just to build one sentence off of what Erin said there, and provide educators with the tools they need to efficiently create some of those options for students as well. Not that the technology has to be the tool that does that all the time, but that it can help us create the things that provide those same choices.
Yeah, in Northville schools, we have a 3-legged stool when it comes to AI. It has to make teachers' lives better. It has to make learning more engaging and interactive. And it has to learn how to maintain the uniquely human elements of teaching.
I like that.
Awesome. Well, thank you to each and every one of you for being here today. I hope that you all got something out of just being in a group of people who I have found to be incredible leaders and thinkers on this topic. To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be sure to include all of the things mentioned here today in the notes as we release this. And to everyone out there who is working with AI, I think that if we approach this with a mindset of curiosity and skepticism, if we combine those two things, that inevitably we will end up with some growth. I think that we have never really seen a technology quite like this. And for those of us who can approach it in that way, I think that it leads to a whole lot of green pastures. So let's all embark on this journey together as we create this reality by thinking about it deeply and applying what we know. Thanks so much to everyone, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.